Matt Doheny joins us now. Nice to have you here.
Great to be here. Nice to see you, Tom.
New York's new 21st, newly redrawn 21st, covers all the way from the Great Lakes across the entire northern border to Lake Champlain, now down south to Saratoga, west of Fulton County. I mean, this is a huge new swath of territory.
Almost 17,000 square miles,
Has to be the biggest congressional district in New York, or one of the largest.
Oh yeah, New York State, certainly one of the biggest in the East Coast or east of the Mississippi. And we spent a lot of time, as you know, 194 towns and cities in the district, and we've been to them, and it's taken a long time to get around and see everybody. But you got to work hard in a district like this. People want to, and they appreciate when you go out and you're at the events. You reach out to people, you go to the dinners, and so it's part of the campaigning strategy.
And speaking of 193, 194 towns, we'll ask you about that a little later. I understand you can name every one of them, and we'll have you do that right for us.
It's going to take 5 minutes. You got 5 minutes for your viewers, so go ahead.
All right. This seat has long been held by Republicans, dating back to the Civil War, up until 2009. You and the party would like to win it back.
Absolutely, because it's really where the folks here in the new 21st district traditionally live. That we're people who are thoughtful, hardworking, but we believe in common sense and in really being a fiscal conservative. And so just like people whether you live in Shazy or over in Clayton, people count their pennies and understand the value of hard work. And I think that message is why the seat has been Republican traditionally, obviously up to the last couple of years ago. And we're very happy that not only are we the Republican nominee, but we've been able for the first time since Congressman McHugh became Secretary of the Army to unite the Republicans, the conservatives, and the independents as one unified ticket.
And that's obviously a big deal because both of the previous races that played into it. You had more than one candidate from the right and splitting the vote, and I think the party and many people believe that both times it may have cost the Republican candidate the race.
Sure. Well, as a business guy, you got to look at the data and look at the numbers. And when you say that, my opponent, Congressman Owens, got 47.5% of the vote, which is obviously the smallest winning percentage of anyone in the country. And you say, Mr. Hoffman and I got together, almost 53%. I mean, it speaks for itself, those numbers. So, we worked hard behind the scenes to make sure that, we did the outreach. We talked to people and make sure they understand my agenda and, what we need to do to work together. And we were successful to unify not only the Republicans, the conservatives, but the independents party as well.
Last time around, you lost by less than 2,000 votes. Do you think the new territory, which is more Republican territory, or more registered Republican voters, does that give you the edge that you need?
It certainly doesn't hurt, and it definitely will give us the competitive opportunity. And at the end of the day, look, it's about the vision. And it's about your credibility and your qualifications to go ahead and bring the economic message that so desperately is needed here all over the North Country down to Washington. When you have unemployment near 10% right here, 11% up in St. Lawrence County, it is job one to make sure you're talking about the economy, job creation, and good old-fashioned growth. And that's what I've been doing for the past 7 weeks. We've been on our 50 Businesses in 50 Days tour, where we're going to finish up this week. And I don't know when we're going to air, but we're going to hit 100 businesses instead of 50. We're going to actually have been sit-downs, visits, tours, the whole 9 yards with 100 businesses. And so, we certainly have a deeper appreciation and reaffirms a lot of the core economic message that I'm going to continue to talk about up to November 6th.
As you talk to those businesses, is the economy priority and
issue
number one?
And the challenge, and sometimes honestly, the down part is, hey, we have great things going on, but you know what? I don't like what's coming out of Washington. Whether it's like President Obama's policies, I'm scared to death what Obamacare is going to do. I'm scared to death that you have, my taxes to be going up. Because, small businessmen, if you run the corporation as an S Corp or an LLC, all those levels that Obama talks about, that's going to hit me. It's going to hit my ability to reinvest in my business. And secondly, they're sick of the dysfunction. My opponent's in Washington and, part of the problem where they're saying, look, can't people get together? And so that's when I remind people that I'm a businessman, and that, no matter how good a deal is for me, that if it's not okay and a good deal for the other guy across the table, you're never going to do a deal. And so unfortunately, I think that gets lost in all the back and forth with Washington. You have to compromise, not in terms of your core principles, but you have to compromise to get things done for yourself and for your constituents. And unfortunately, I think that gets lost in Washington. And I'm going to bring a common sense North Country message down there to say, look, I'm a business guy, I believe, and I'm a fiscal conservative, but we need to get things done for the American people.
Let's remind viewers about your business background.
Sure.
You went to Cornell, and after graduating from Cornell, you went to Wall Street, and then back home. You run your own capital firm?
Exactly. So I'm a guy that's been involved with businesses, invest in and turn around troubled companies that have just been that are dead, that are hurting, that need to go ahead and the broad array of solutions, everything from operational mismanagement to just too much debt to refining what the product offering is. I get in and fix businesses and to understand what drives the economy. Like there's no more greater challenge than to say a company that's gone to the skids and to try to bring it back. And so that's in terms of my experience, we've done that all over the area, and then in my own personal business here, starting North Country Capital to focus on turnaround situations, but also startups for small businesses where we found that there's just sometimes there's a gap between sometimes what can normally get financed through banks and what the opportunity set is for young entrepreneurs or for people who have established businesses that just don't quite fit in the neat box. And so that's what I've been able to seize on over the last couple of years.
So you provide that capital. Mm-hmm. Can you give us examples of the types of businesses you've helped?
Well, everything from an embroidery company, to home builders and everything, in between. Again, these are these are startups or these are smaller businesses that where you just can't fit in the exact niche that a traditional lender or a traditional financing structure would allow.
So that business expertise, how would that help you or make you a better congressman?
Oh, and 100 times that we're going to go see 100 businesses where we talk one-on-one with business leaders. And so, people need to have the confidence to say, hey, I'm going to send this guy to Washington to carry my agenda. So when we talk about everything from depreciation schedules to P&L statements to understand, how does, workers' compensation, how does unemployment insurance, how does, tax schedules, how does that impact my business when you go down to the House floor and actually vote? And also the agenda that you're going to bring to say, like, one thing Tom had always time and time again, I say this every week, no business person, I've known thousands of business people, been involved with hundreds of businesses. Not once have I ever heard, Matt, if you raise my taxes, make the regulatory regime more difficult, and hit me with more mandates like Obamacare, I'm going to go out and create jobs. It just doesn't happen. And so, that core message that people understand, like, what to do, you have been on the front lines, you're still involved with troubled businesses and turning them around and making profits, and all those things that really are needed right here in the North Country, whether you live in Plattsburgh or over to Potsdam. And so that's the message I'll carry.
Are there already taxes that you're targeting that if you go to D.C. you're looking at to either reduce or eliminate?
It's funny, it's like the Hippocratic Oath, right? First, do no harm. And so right now we have a fiscal cliff where if we don't go ahead and stop, what's going to happen, taxes are going to go up on everybody. On everybody. And so that's the first thing we're going to do right now. Number two is I talk about making the tax code simpler, flatter, and fair. What the distortion you see in the economy and what makes it so hard, for your small business person out there is like, look, I don't have a whole horde of lobbyists and lawyers down in Washington that competing for this tax break or this ethanol credit. They're like, just give me a fair shake. I'm a fair shake. I'm more than happy to pay my fair share of taxes. But don't make it seem like you're putting your foot on my on my shoulder to hold me down. You don't have help me up, but don't push me down. And so when you think about the tax policy, if you're just a regular person, here with an auto body shop, you don't have a special tax credit. You don't have anything. If you're a guy selling insurance in a local agency, where's my special program? They don't want the special program. They say, make it so I can compete when I'm trying to do commercial building here, make the processing, the permit process, so it's not like I'm going through 15 rounds of red tape. So I'm willing to do what's fair. We'll do with all the regulations from labor to environmental. But those things I hear every single day, and that's what makes the 50 Businesses 50-day tour so really helpful to my candidacy and what hopefully we'll do starting in January.
Do you support a flat tax?
Well, that would be the ultimate goal essentially, but practically speaking, we want to get it flatter and fair. And so there's different proposals. Governor Romney wants to cut across the board down 20%. Now Vice Presidential nominee Congressman Ryan wants to get down to two tax brackets, 10 and 25. So I'm very much open to all that and more. So to make it so, again, government has to stop picking winners and losers. I hear that time and time again. These are hardworking people out there. And maybe they don't even own the business. They work in the business. You're like, so why does that guy get that? It's like, what? So why, time and time again with ethanol, like, why do we have all this ethanol? Well, because the farmers in Iowa have better lobbyists. And oh, by the way, that ruins, my small engine motor and my boat motor because of all that. No, that's the common sense things that people just get fed up with. And to say, what, let's have, we need as a government to take care of those core services, military, the social safety net, roads, infrastructure, right? But people see these things and like they start shaking their head, and that's the message I'll bring to Washington.
You mentioned the fiscal cliff,
Sure.
choices to be made coming up for the lame duck Congress, but obviously you would be very interested in what happens there.
We're all interested, Tom.
If it doesn't get kicked down the road, the proverbial can, extend the Bush era tax cuts, all of them, as is?
Well, is there a point in time where we can actually say these are the tax rates that should be continued? But certainly, because again, the thing, you can't love jobs and hate the job creators. And as I said before, you tax people, you regulate them more, you hit them with more mandates, it's not going to produce economic growth in jobs. It's just a fact. That's an economic fact. And I talk about that every single day. So you have to continue on.
So the big debate has been for the past several weeks now about, do the wealthiest get taxed at a higher rate? Do you open the possibility to anyone's taxes going up, whether it's $250,000, $500,000, $1 million, any threshold where you would say, yeah, those wealthy folks should pay a higher rate?
Well, but again, that's when you actually look at the data in terms of like how cash flows for a small business. And so, you're a small businessman, all of a sudden you realize like, my income is those thresholds you talked about. But secondly, like again, right now, when you have unemployment, near double digits in the North Country, like that's unacceptable. And so the same people like, will you go ahead and create more jobs? I'm like, you can't make people create jobs. You have to create the climate and you have to nurture and foster the development of local activity here, right? And so when you think about what comes out of the White House, you think about, you didn't build that. And, if you look at the overall speech and say, well, that comment was taken out of context. Well, if you look at the overall speech, it wasn't taken out of context. It might even be more, severe in the sense of like, we need to go ahead and pool all our resources.
This is the president's comment from
is
a few weeks ago
you didn't build
about
that.
You didn't
Correct.
build it to the government helps every business.
Exactly. You didn't build this. And I mean, look, all over this district, people are angry about that. I mean, because you put your whole heart and soul, you risk your life savings with you and your wife to start up this dream small business, and it became successful. And you're like, well, there was no bailout for me coming. This was, my hard work. And, I remember when I missed my kid's soccer game because I was here till 10 o'clock night for the entire month of, August, for instance. So that really resonates. So again, penalizing people, they're job creators that are potential entrepreneurs, and just, folks who can go ahead and commit capital to get things kicked up, started here. That makes no sense economically. And right now, it really would be a double negative.
So now is not the time to raise anybody's taxes whatsoever.
Period. Right now.
You mentioned bailout, talk of a possible another stimulus plan coming down the road. Mm-hmm. Anything? Is there any benefit, in your opinion, of that to generate, to invigorate the economy and get things moving?
Well, let's look at the facts again, right? So talk about the big stimulus, right, back in 2009, and what did it actually occur? What was it, and what happened with it, right? What was it? Unfortunately, it wasn't an infrastructure bank. It wasn't really a deep program of $800 billion of spending that would really get a lot of value as American people, and just basically kept states afloat, and was another grab bag of, that really, at that point, Speaker Pelosi in terms of what she wanted. It just didn't make any economic sense. And what was the result? I mean, President's own economic spokesperson, if you pass the stimulus, unemployment will keep below 8%. Well, guess what? 40 months later, Tom, it's just been absolutely false. I mean, like, these are just the data, and that's just the historical fact. So it hasn't worked because you know what? We need to have dynamic private sector growth, especially up here in our region here. Like, the government's always going to be part of the solution. We have wonderful institutions from everything, from universities and schools, and in terms of all the other government type things here, and that's very positive for our area, including Fort Drum. But you need to have robust private sector growth in tandem with it, where you can't get too reliant on one or the other, but you have to have dynamic private sector growth. And so when you start talking about stimulus, well, at the end of the day, you're taking money out of the private sector to put in through the government funnel to the public sector, and it hasn't worked. We tried it 3 years ago. So, there's things that as a country that we need to do to make sure that we have a strong military, the police, the courts, and infrastructure. I mean, I'm a deep believer that's really a core function of the government. And so whether, folks like me who drive between Plattsburgh and Watertown all the time, that we know the importance of making sure you have cell phone coverage. People who live in the Adirondack Park, make sure we have broadband. Businesses who are spread across our large rural district, to make sure they have their power needs met, whether it be getting into the grid and actually having cheap or at least affordable power for these large facilities, or facilities that could get bigger, or things like natural gas. So I mean, that's part of my jobs tour in the 50 Business 50 Days, like where sometimes certain facilities are just located because we have the power resources, Alcoa and Messina, where the International Paper Plant would be a huge benefit, whether it comes from north-south or over in Vermont to get a natural gas line. So those types of things that are what I call infrastructure are very much within what government needs to do, and very much what I will be a champion of, because I understand. When you look at a business, I understand the labor challenges, I understand the balance sheet, but also understand in terms of the feedstock and what you need to make sure that you get the businesses running, and you want to grow employment. That's what it's about.
You talked about natural gas. Do you favor hydrofracking? Should New York move ahead with that?
Well, right now, I mean, it seems like we're being left behind. You have a boom down in Pennsylvania, where from all my friends down in Central PA, you can't get a hotel room. Just so much everything filled up in your economic growth. So look, natural gas is definitely part of our economic energy future, and I would it's not really in our district, but to our friends in the South, to give it a chance and do it in a way that's environmentally friendly, but to do it in a way that actually at least gives us the opportunity to tap our own resources as we go forward.
It wouldn't, obviously the Adirondack Park would be off limits, but,
but there's no shale there as far as I know.
Other parts of
yeah, but you get
New York,
further south
right.
and central down the Marcellus Shale. But I think it makes sense. But again, do it in a way that follows the economic and environmental guidelines. But you got to tap our own resources, Tom.
You talked about infrastructure, wireless. What about things like rail? What about the rooftop highway? What about major projects like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think about in terms of what the business demand is and what the actual practical demand and need is on the ground, right? So when you talk about growth, because this is really about the economy and how we develop that. Well, that's great. We have this great plan, but we're trying to recruit executives from around the country, and guess what? If their kids can't pick up their iPhone or their BlackBerry or their PS2 system, guess what? Like, Dad, this place is terrible. I can't actually do this on the road. I want to go back to where we came from. Or the same thing, in terms of, you can't have, your broadband or T1 line where you can't, tap into really what we're doing as in the 21st century. So it really becomes almost like a baseline for growth. In other words, it's like the 21st century infrastructure is just like having roads, water, and sewer. It's like, well, if you don't have cell phone and broadband, it's really just like you're living in a western town from long ago. So you have to have that would go ahead and lead to the growth. Now, other projects that are very much necessary, whether we talk about power or natural gas, or whether we talk about rail, will definitely be part of the solution. There's no question about that. Because look, you look at the economics, I mean, it actually makes sense. And if you want to go ahead at that type of manufacturing, other footprint, you certainly need that type of stuff. And so I would definitely be a strong proponent of infrastructure development and growth, because I think that's where, where the federal government can really actually lead to and have a very positive impact about what we do up here in the North Country.
And I know you must get asked all the time about rooftop, whether you're supportive, whether that's the plan, whether a scaled-back type of highway, east-west highway is better?
Well, like in a perfect world, certainly, we would love to have that. But right now, at the practical reality is that it's just not going to happen. And so, I want to focus on things that actually can build growth now, that will get businesses up and running now, that will lead to our existing infrastructure and lead to our existing businesses to have them grow, right? And those are the things that I'm going to be focused on in the near term. And as we go forward, when when the federal government isn't in the whole $16 trillion, where we're not spending $1.2 trillion more than we take in every year, then we can, some things that aren't as mandatory as today projects, we can deal with them down the road.
Let's talk about the debt. How big of a priority is that for you? Where does that go among your top priorities?
The two twin challenges that face our country right now are growth and debt. When I say growth, it is unacceptable that there is unemployment 11% in St. Lawrence and Fulton counties and almost 10% in Jefferson and Clinton counties. Unacceptable. That is project number one. That is point number one, and that's why I believe I'll be successful, because people want to send a self-made businessman who will understand and focus like a laser on the economy. But the second, the twin of the challenges, is debt. Right now, I mean, look at any balance sheet. I know balance sheets very well. So when you bring in $2.3 trillion of revenue in a year, and oh, by the way, you spend $3.6 trillion, where's it being financed? Being financed from some of our people who are not friendly. China, the Arabian countries, so on and so forth. And how does that make any sense? If you brought home, your wife would kill you if you spent that kind of money compared to your salary. Businesses would file for bankruptcy just because of that. And so, we're at a point now where we truly have, the inflection point. Are we going to be a country that's going to continue our strength and continue robust growth? Or are we just going to go just like Europe, or even worse, Japan, where they just spent themselves into economic doldrums and haven't become, the dynamic economy that it once was? That is a fundamental challenge. So, I view this as twin challenges. Like, we're going to get people back to work. At the same time, get government back to a level we can afford.
If you're elected, you'll have that delicate balance, though. How do you cut the debt and at the same time do what your constituents expect, bring home the bacon, keep
Sure.
the money coming to Fort Drum, and help the struggling economy of northern New York with help from Washington.
Without question. And the balance I strike, and I want people to know that, is that, again, you think about the core mission of government, especially federal government, is really what we need here. We need infrastructure. We need to have robust military. Those are the things that fit squarely within what the needs are of the community here. And so that actually is definitely something that I will advocate for, that I will be a staunch, not only defender, but to be an articulate, what I call salesman in chief. You got to vote the right way for your district. You got to take care of constituent services. But the third prong of really what I call, the three legs of the stool is being the salesman in chief. And so, but again, you can't be a salesman. We're like, so you don't have cell phone coverage? No. Thanks for stopping by, right? I mean, you got to have that type of baseline here. But again, when you have all these government programs, and from a subsidy to the corporate welfare to just doing things that honestly people are like, I think that person should be working. And you hear that time and time again. In terms of going on my 50 businesses tour, and I've learned this in my own business experience, where you have unemployment insurance that goes for 2 years, where you have workers' comp challenge, where people aren't really being forthright, and those things just weigh business down, and people just look at it like, that doesn't seem right to me. And there's a big sense out there just in terms of folks I see on the street, see at Stewart's gas station or what have you.
You talked about government programs. Should entitlements be on the table when it comes to debt reduction? And if so, how much do you cut in?
Well, when it comes to entitlements, obviously the two big ones, Medicare and Social Security.
Right.
And I'm a deep believer in the social safety net. I'm a deep believer in those two programs. Why? Well, because I actually did the research. I actually did look back, and why did we have in 1935 the Social Security Act? Why did we have in 1965 a Medicare bill that passed with President Johnson's leadership? Because look, as a people, we decided that we're not going to have people die in the streets, that we're not going to have generations just be wrecked because of parents failing health, and that we don't want to have a poorhouse or people retiring penniless, right, after a long, hard, productive life. Simple as that. So when I look at these things as a businessman, I say, how are we going to keep them, Tom? How are we going to be able to preserve them? Well, right now, if you look at the balance sheet, we're going to hit the wall in less than a decade for Medicare, and we're going to have 23 to 25 years for Social Security. But the great thing is we see the train coming at us. We just have to make those decisions now. So we have to go ahead and come up with solutions that are going to save, that are going to fortify, and make sure that these programs stay around for when people my age or younger actually need them and become part of the overall American pageant here. That's what I'm going to be focusing on. So everything's needs to be dealt with, and dealt with in a comprehensive fashion, I think.
If you were in the House, would you vote for Paul Ryan's Medicare plan?
Well, again, it's part of an overall budget. And I came out and said, I wouldn't, because I don't think it deals with the issues in a timely fashion. And again, we need to go back to the drawing board. So,
Farm bill has been an issue for the past several weeks. Have you, when Speaker Boehner was in the area campaigning for you, did you talk to him about the Farm bill and bringing it to the House floor for a vote?
I'm in favor of the Farm bill. That because right now we can't get to the point where in September that we essentially revert back to a 1940 exactly. We revert back to a 1949 bill. I mean, we live in the 21st century. Things have changed. We need to update legislation, and we can't just, again, going back to the dysfunction of Congress, lead to a situation where we're just going back to basically World War II type legislation here. But I'm not going to comment in terms of Speaker. Our conversations certainly came up, and I've been public to say that I think it's time to have an up or down vote on the House floor and just to see where people live. Now that's only part of this, because obviously you have to reconcile it with the Senate, and certainly it gets into issues that really, unfortunately, and this is one of the things that I hear all the time too. It's like, why is all this food stamp clumped on with actually part of what we're dealing with, dairy and other farm programs? Like, they don't make any sense. It's almost a historical, accident or something that doesn't make any sense anymore. And I think we have to pull these things apart, because from a financial perspective, the food stamps dwarf the size of the budget of the actual good old-fashioned ag programs that we talk about, from cattle to dairy, from organic to crop farms. You know what I mean?
How many billion would you cut the food stamp program?
Well, we need to get it. I mean, because there's one thing I hear on the campaign trail all the time is that people say, people have hard times, and I deeply believe in the social safety net. Like, we all have tough times out there. You never know what's going to happen, and part of our American project is we want to make sure people are taken care of. When that social safety net turns into a hammock, and I hear time and time again say, let's cut the hammock, enough. And so part of that is, there's different proposals, but I just want to say, what is the core program? What does it actually need to serve? And that's the number I look for. I mean, certainly it has to be, it has to be right size, there's no question. So whether it's the Senate or the House version, or somewhere between, it needs to be done in a fashion. Because part of it, we learned from the mid-90s with welfare reform, it works. if you just continue to say, hey, you know what, we'll give you something for not doing anything, you know what, people are going to do it. And so there's one concept that going from that I've heard, unfortunately, a depressing amount of times in my 100 stops at these businesses, is what I call the reservation wage. Have you heard that one before, Tom? So I said, I always ask every, business manager, president, CEO, say, what are your two biggest challenges? And they'll go through, and a lot of it's become, unfortunately, Washington, the dysfunction. But I say, who's your biggest competitor? Sometimes it'd be like the guy down the street, or somebody in Canton or in Plattsburgh. But a lot is the government. I mean, the government competes. It's like, no, they're not selling my product. Is right now for me to recruit the type of wage and the person is, I'm actually fighting the government because I have to get to a certain level of a reservation wage before the person will come to work with me, because otherwise it makes economic sense for that person to stay and actually get government programs. And they're like, that's crazy. And I tell you one story, that's down in Fulton County, I won't name the company. I said, we actually have people come in work and they say, you know what? I'm not working anymore. I'm going to go and get unemployment insurance and get back on, in government program. And they fought it, and they continue to lose. It's like, that's a depressing. This is the CFO of a real company, and he's like, this is depressing. So when you talk about the reservation wage, so when you're trying to right-size these programs, look, safety net, we're all in agreement of. And I will fight to the death to make sure that preserves, just like preserving Medicare and Social Security. But when that thing turns into a hammock, you get people willing the courage to stand up and say, no more. Let's get people back to work who are able-bodied, and let's make sure that we have unemployment at a level of 4, 5, 6%, not 11, 10% that we're dealing with right now under the Obama-Owens regime.
You mentioned subsidies for farmers and ethanol in the Midwest. Same concerns about farmers getting subsidies under the Farm Bill, dairy farmers in the North
I don't
Country.
think the Farm Bill is subsidies as more as it comes in terms of the whole insurance program. And so, look,
And is that?
Look, it's very challenging, and I think the practical, reality is that's part of what's going to happen. And part of the bill coming to the floor is, look, let's have a full amendment process. Let's have a whole, up or down vote on these amendments, as well as the, bill. I don't think with the bill that came out of the Ag Committee is going to be the final bill. And also through the process in terms of reconciling from the Senate. There are things that need to be more pro-growth. Because certainly want to make sure that our family farmers are taken care of and continue to have the ability to become very much growth-oriented and continue to grow. And part of their growth is actually, getting more production from the cows. But at the same time, there's a lot of great things going on in New York State. We've had a lot of publicity wrapped around, the development of yogurt and yogurt flakes. That just requires a lot of milk. And so you don't want to put yourself in a position where you just can't stop. You just have to stop and cap yourself, as opposed to you can continue to grow. Because with that growth, not only comes more people on the farm helping you, but all the other agribusinesses and the second and third, order companies that actually help you. And whether the local grain company, the local seed company, the construction firms that will help you grow the barn, and all those other management tools that really farmers, which are really just great, not small, but sometimes good-sized business people actually need. So I just don't want to have this limit to growth, and it's
You're
challenging.
talking about the production limits that would go along with getting the price supports.
Because you got to be careful, because I don't want to have people come back 3 years like, well, we got to change this because we could be booming and you're holding us back. And that, again, when the economy is number one and when jobs are the biggest challenge we face, really as a crisis point here, we've had 40 months, of a country of higher than 8% unemployment. Things were unthinkable that we're at right now. And certainly, when you wake up in the morning, you go to Ogdensburg, Messina, Canton, Potsdam, Gouverneur, and all the other little towns in between, and say there's 11% unemployment. Now, the underemployment number, what they call the U6 number, that's probably getting closer to 20%. That's unacceptable. We have to do all these things and can't limit ourselves, and make sure we have the growth opportunities for farmers as well as small business people.
How about the border? The new border agreement between the U.S. and Canada being phased in over the next several months and years. The initiatives in that, good? You like them, everything in there, or do you have concerns?
Well, my concern is to make sure that Canadians, with a stronger currency, and look, I grew up in Alexandria Bay, right, which is on the border. From the Bay, you can float on over to Canada. And so, someone who grew up, obviously pre 9/11 time, I played in hockey leagues. We'd go to Eastern Ontario, we'd go to Kingston, Montreal, Quebec City, and so on, all the way down through to Toronto all the time to play hockey. And so understand the culture as well as the importance of the Canadians to our people here. So, you live in Plattsburgh. People have, home hockey tickets to the Montreal Canadiens here, for God's sakes. That's a suburb. And over, whether it's Messina with Cornwall or Ogdensburg across from Brockville, or, really Ottawa, that is a huge part of our economy here. So I want to make sure that people who actually want to commit capital, who want to spend money, and you see that in the parking lots in the malls in Plattsburgh or Watertown, let's get these people here to make sure that we're, kick and start our own economy here. And I visited businesses. One, lovely woman who runs a business in Ogdensburg. her whole thing is catering to startup companies from Canada in the U.S. What a great business. And so we want to make sure that we do everything on the border that doesn't slow that down, that gives people the confidence as well as the comfort that they can come here and invest their hard-earned dollars right
Any
here.
initiatives beyond the border agreement that you would propose?
Well, look, I will definitely be very active, and there's a lot of hardworking people, from the North Country Chamber of Commerce to the Thousand Islands to the St. Lawrence County folks who are border specialists, and I will definitely use them and work closely with them. But part of it, again, third leg of the stool, salesman in chief. Like we get on the road and say, like, you know what, talk to these certain companies and talk to, whether I'm CEOs, CFOs, entrepreneurs, be like, you know what, why don't you come over and take a little tour with us? Let's see what's going on in Plattsburgh. Let's see what the great things going on in Champlain and Rouse's Point. Let's top in Messina and in northern Franklin County and Chateauguay to talk about what the infrastructure is, what the growth is, and being great investment, great labor pool here, wonderful resources. We have a lot of water, a lot of land, and a lot of bright people. Both from our homegrown as well as people come in here for university. Let's take a tour here. So I just want to make sure that it's hard to get through the border. All these challenges in terms of visas, and we'll make sure that it's seamless and as easy as humanly possible, and to help our economic, because again, it's about growth and about jobs.
How would you describe yourself socially? Liberal,
conservative,
moderate?
Yeah. How would I describe myself?
Yeah, on social issues, where do you come down on social issues?
I describe myself as a hardworking Republican candidate here. And so, again, when you talk about, issues across the board, again, I'm data-driven, I'm a businessman, so you have to deal with each one, as they come. No one believes in gun rights in the Second Amendment more than I do. If you don't own a gun, you should. And, and again, it goes back to between myself and my opponent. One guy would vote for Nancy Pelosi and has vote for Speaker and for Minority Leader. She wants to take guns out of our pockets. I abhor that idea and would never ever vote for that.
He has won the endorsement of the NRA, though.
And the practical reality is that the question is that the most, if not the only vote you get to do on guns is who you're going to vote for, who's going to bring the legislation to the floor. Because if you have a situation, we're going to talk about this, Tom, as well, that if Nancy Pelosi is back in charge of the House and Harry Reid stays in charge of the Senate and President Obama is reelected, you're going back to times where we had the early Clinton years where the Brady Bill and all those other things that NRA folks fight tooth and nail on. So I don't know if people who, and again, a lot of our folks here are, like myself, lifetime member of the NRA, deeply believe in our gun rights and say, Matt, it was like, tell me where you're in the Second Amendment. It's like, I will defend it to the courts. Like, all right, I'm with you. And so those people need to understand, you get one vote, who's going to run the place? I'll vote for Speaker Boehner or whoever else, the reasonable alternative is. My opponent has been on the record of voting for Nancy Pelosi. That is an anti-gun vote.
Some of the other social issues, abortion.
In terms of
your position on abortion.
Talk about I said anything that will come before get to the House floor. I'll have 100% pro-life voting record. Those are things that everything from notification and other issues like that. The Supreme Court obviously has ruled on certain things, but when it comes down to what we're going to talk about on the floor, that's where I cast my votes.
But not as far right as some of the other candidates we're seeing running here that talk about it in all cases.
I just talk about what can come to the House floor. So there's a million ways to go with it.
Let me ask you about support for Planned Parenthood. Should they receive federal money?
Well, this is part of the overall government subsidies that I'm just trying to get the federal government, out of the business of, and just get them out of that altogether.
Public broadcasting.
Tom, you are a great journalist. We can make sure that you have employment at a lot of other places here. And guess what? All the great programs in the PBS facilities themselves, when you turn on your cable TV and you have over 200 channels, that there's a lot of ways that PBS will be part of the mainstream economically in a different way.
And NPR as well, public radio, same story.
Yes, sir.
Is there an issue that you and your opponent agree on?
Is there an issue that we agree on?
Or is there any particular issue out there that you both come down pretty much on the same side?
We come on the same side of? Well, I think that my opponent has recently come out against raising the minimum wage, for instance. where that's truly would be a job killer, at our lower rungs to make sure that we keep, vitality. And again, after visiting all these businesses, a lot of people don't start at minimum wage; they start up at a higher wage, but it would have the increase of inflating everything and really ruining growth.
Obviously, an issue in both New York State and federal right
now.
Well,
without question,
yes.
Across the board. So we were quite heartened to see that my opponent came out, against the minimum wage. Other economic matters. I'm trying to remember, Bill, some of his records, because unfortunately he's taken a lot of bad votes. He's taken votes against to try to change the regulatory regime, the REINS Act. He voted against that because that would truly change the burden on our small businesses. He's come out in favor of the Buffett rule to try to raise taxes. It makes no sense. On top of that, obviously, we disagree fundamentally on Obamacare. Where you have a situation where the government's going to take over 1/6 of our economy. At the same time, it guts Medicare that I'm talking about preserving by over $700 billion over the course of the next 10 years. Those are pretty clear choices, and I think my opponent, to get to where you're going at, wants to style himself when he's up here at home. Is more pragmatic, but unfortunately his voting record when you get him down to Washington is pretty much across the board with the president.
Let me ask you what kind of politician you would be when in Washington.
Sure.
We're seeing a number of races across the country now where we have Republicans that are running that are saying that they're non-compromising conservatives, that they believe so strongly in their core values that they're going to stick to their guns and there is no room for compromise across the aisle when it comes to pretty much anything. How would you describe yourself? Are you among them, or are you a more moderate type Republican candidate that can have your values and your core beliefs, but at the same time, at the end of the day, put your constituents and the American people first?
Yeah, exactly. Because again, as a business guy, nothing ever happened, in terms of doing deals, turning businesses around, all those things I've been involved with, unless it makes sense for both sides. You got to compromise. That's part of actually being a business person, to actually get things done. And so the whole idea is like, this is where I live, and if you don't live with me, I don't care. That's not who I am as a person. That's not what I've been trained as a businessman. And I don't think that's North Country, to be honest with you. I just don't think people think that way. Now, they want to make sure that we get the economy going and stop the out of control spending. And you have to draw lines and be like, hey, we got to do what's right for the people and make sure that we get growth going here and stop spending our children and our grandchildren's future, okay? That's part of it. But to actually get things done, and I will work in a bipartisan fashion. Because, when you think about what I'll be like in Washington, hardworking. That's why I can reel off all the towns off the top of my head. I've been everywhere, and we'll talk about, making sure that we visit every town in the district every single year. That just takes time and hustle, and that certainly, even my detractors will admit that I'm one of the hardest working guys out here. We're out here 7 days a week. And so when you get to the, actually after sworn in and do the things that we need to do, not only with constituent services and our voting, but the salesman in chief, that's going to require a big effort. And I'm going to work with all our local leaders, and good ideas happen all over the Northeast and all over the country to get things going here and do whatever I can to be the salesman in chief and to help grow our local economy and add those pieces there. So I think people are going to be quite happy once I get in office and those types of things and the receptive nature that I will have relative to people's ideas and say, hey, have you chased this ground ball down? I've chased down every ground ball. Doesn't matter if it's a slow sinker to third base that you're not going to get thrown out. Sprint down the line even though you're going to get thrown out. That's the type of mentality that I'll have in Washington.
All right, now we got to get to this. So this 193, 194 towns. On one take on YouTube, and forgive me, there will probably be the skeptics or the cynics that say, wait a minute, no way. He did not do this in one take. Give us the setup for this, and we're going to show a little bit of this.
Is that right?
This is a YouTube video.
Well, what happened was that we were doing campaign commercials, and at the end of the day, the second day of the shoot, the guys who were on staff said, you can't name, because we always have a back and forth. It's like, I know you've been everywhere, but you can't do it off time. I can do it. So it was a challenge. I said, turn the camera on, and I looked in the camera, and that's when I went through all 193 towns. Now, the funny part is that because we did that, everybody checked it out and said, oh, by the way, you missed a town. I go, I didn't miss a town. I said, well, you did. A sliver in the town of Ballston in southern, or the mid part of Saratoga County actually is in the district. The Board of Elections didn't even know.
Okay, fair enough.
So this is why you look at the YouTube video. So the Watertown Daily Times report said you can't do it after I walked out of a business tour outside the New York Air Base, big facility in Watertown. Just turn on the camera. You need a little flip top, right? And I said, where do you want to start? And I ripped through all 194. So there's two different videos. There you have it. And the reason we can do it, obviously I have a decent memory because I've been there. And so I know the difference between Ellenburg here in Clinton County and Ellisburg in southern Jefferson County, Champlain here in Clinton County, and Clayton over on the St. Lawrence River. And whether it's Dannemora versus...
Yeah, but here you're doing the 23rd district. Give us the first three alphabetically in Washington.
Washington County?
There you go.
17 towns. Argyle, Cambridge, Dresden, Eaton, Fort Anne, Fort Edward,
Right.
Granville, Greenwich,
done it.
Hebron, Hampton, Hartford, Jackson, Kingsbury, Putnam, Salem, Whitehall, and White Creek. That's 17, my man.
You've done it. Quite a race. I think everyone's predicting this is going to be a really tight race. Probably one of the tightest in the country.
Sure. And that's why we're out working so hard. And we appreciate the opportunity with you and your viewers, because it's really going to come down to those few voters. And we don't know if they're in Plattsburgh or Watertown or Glens Falls or Old Forge or Johnstown or anywhere in between. But it's really going to come down to what direction do we want to go as a North Country district and really the country. We had one of the 10 closest races 2 years ago. We're going to work hard to make sure that we get our message out to the people who remember us from the old 23rd and the folks that the 40% that are new and the new 21st. And we're going to continue to work hard and get our message out every day. And that's all we can do.
Matt Doheny, thanks for stopping by. Good luck.
It's been fun. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it.